seen me before. This is different to my usual shtick because I've been actually doing some work. So this is more of a what I did on my holiday type presentation, and that's where I went on my holiday. 2 months working with the BBC. Is there anyone here from the BBC? Good. So we were contracted by them to build what turned out to be really quite an interesting application, and it was with BBC R&D, and they're working on a platform called IP Studio, which is intended to be like an IP-enabled version of how you make television, right? Now, I've never really had anything to do with making television, so this was something of a crash course. Now, if you're doing pre-recorded stuff, these days it's just a bit like being a simple version of Netflix, being the BBC, right? You've got a limited number of channels, play some videos out, they go out on the internet, you're sort of done, right? They have this legacy, you know, masts and satellites and stuff, but that'll go, and really, it's pretty straightforward. But live television is a completely different kettle of fish. First of all, you need these things. That's a studio. That's there in Manchester. That's where the news is, and that's us presenting the news. That's my that's my team. We got a tour of the studio, which is great. Now, for every one of these studios, they have one of these, which is a mixing gallery. Now, what these things do is you have a whole bunch of cameras, and these days they're all robot cameras. In that studio, there's the presenters, and there's like an assistant making coffee, and that's it. There's no camera there anymore. There's nobody stood behind it. There's nothing really, and they just move around and go up and down all by themselves. It's absolutely remarkable. But here, you need to mix them, and what the mixing means is you've got all your cameras, you've got pre-recorded videos, you've got stills like the BBC logo and all those kinds of things, and you've got to switch between them, right? And that's called vision mixing, and that's what all of this stuff is for. Now, that's all well and good. And when you're doing live broadcasts from inside, like from a studio, you need one gallery per studio and you're kind of done, right? That's a really cheap mixer. But when you're doing outside broadcasts, you need these, right? Now, once upon a time, the only people who could do outside broadcasts were people at the BBC, because they owned that shit, right? Costs absolutely millions. You could have 6 people in that van, and inside that van is the same thing as there was in that mixing gallery, right? But these days, we can all do outside broadcasts, right? And this is a massive challenge for the BBC. They have one gallery for sport, for example, right? Now, once upon a time, they only had one channel doing sport at any one time. So that's kind of fine. One mixing gallery, one sports program. But these days, there's lots of sports going on. You've got people out there streaming on YouTube and Facebook Live and everything else, right? And one of the problems they had is BBC journalists at events unable to get galleries to do broadcasts, so instead going onto Facebook Live. Now, if you think about that as a challenge for an organisation like the BBC, that their own staff are broadcasting on Facebook because the BBC can't provide the equipment. Now, Facebook don't provide those massive galleries, but actually, do you really need all of that? You know, you just go do a 5-minute broadcast from something that's happening, maybe you don't need it. So, that's the problem. So what we were contracted to build was a browser-based vision mixer to do everything pretty much that you can do in that gallery, but in a browser. Now, 6 months ago, well, a year ago maybe, I would have said you were insane to try it. 6 months ago, maybe, but Chrome these days has got some pretty good video processing capabilities. So that's what we did. So their back-end equipment does all of the re-encoding, the rebroadcasting, the reassembly for delivery for the real broadcast chain, so that can broadcast at 1080p. Now, obviously, we can't do the video mixing in a browser at 1080p because your computer will catch fire. So, we need to, and it really, really will. 6, 10, 1080p videos all at once, just don't even try it. We did try it, don't try it. So we had them all downsampled to 360p, so much smaller images. I'll show you some pictures in a second. But the idea is that the editor can go ahead and make their edit decisions in the browser using the smaller images, and then the real sort of broadcast heads can actually send that out to live. We had 6 weeks as well, which was kind of hard. It's really dark, you can't see. These are the cameras that we're using, and they're really tiny. It's like standard sort of SLR type cameras. These are 4K video cameras. And so they're pointing out the window at the most boring view you can imagine. I spent 2 months staring at that view through a camera while trying to make it all work. So these have got SDI connections, which is pretty standard connections. They go to video encoders that then create 1080p streams to go to live and 360p for mixing. We did some UX. We did some very, very bloody quick UX because we had to write a lot of code very, very quickly. But you can see some of the design there. So there's the app. The idea is these are the various inputs. We've kind of faked a few of these because the road outside the media city was just gets really boring. But the idea is multiple cameras. You've got preview, you've got live, you've got audio meter, and using the keyboard or the mouse, you can decide what you're mixing. And you can see the mix decisions here. These are composited video output. So we can put stills over the top of this, what they call lower thirds, which is, you know, when you say somebody very important down here. Dogs, which are the things in the corner, digital on-screen graphics. And VTs, which proved to be extremely challenging. The hardest thing, which is really frustrating, is time. Mostly, you don't have to worry about time on the internet because everything's laggy, right? You spend all your time waiting for the user to do something or waiting for the internet to do something, right? But with video and sound and everything else that's got to be synced up, we need to be accurate to within a few milliseconds. Yeah, maybe you could slip a little bit, but more than a few milliseconds, people start noticing. And the browser is just not capable of really doing that right now. We're using WebRTP for the streams, and it didn't quite hack it, so we need some changes. So Mozilla are currently looking at making some changes. This was one of the cleverest bits. If you've got a 4K camera, but you're broadcasting at 1080p, you've got way more pixels than you need, right? So you can take one 4K camera, put it on a relatively wide view, and chop out 1080p chunks out of your 4K stream, right? And then you can simulate having multiple cameras. Now, if you're in a room like this, even in a room like this, actually, that could be quite useful because like traditional television cameras are massive, great big things, right? And they're quite hard to fit in. In a small venue, they're almost impossible. But a single 4K camera at the back is very easy to set up. Very small tripod. You only take up the space of a couple of people, and then you can simulate having 2 or 3 cameras. And you need more than one camera. If you've ever watched a program for a length of time, you need the viewpoint to shift, and you can zoom in on people's faces while they're talking and everything else. So theoretically, and we'll be testing this later in the year, with a single 4K camera and a laptop with a browser, you could do an entire half-hour live BBC TV production in 1080p. I hope it works. And, this is another page of the app, browsing the inputs. So it needs the IP Studio system to be configured, and the theory is, the idea that we'll be trialling, is that all of this stuff happens in Manchester, all of the actual broadcasting, all the encoding, everything else, and all we need on site is the camera and the person and a really, really fast internet connection. And we should be able to do live TV. There you go, that's it. Thanks everyone.